Hello and welcome back to OT the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, how to spend it. I'm Andy Green.
Yeah, we're here to talk about time and the poetry of time. My name's Felix Schultz.
How you going, Felix?
I'm good. It's been a bit of a busy day as we're recording this. Geneva Watch Days is about to kick off, so we should probably talk about that at some point.
That's a next week job, I think.
Yeah, maybe. Let's see what the watches are like, huh?
We can't foreshadow all of these new releases that we definitely haven't, seen under any sort of embargo.
Definitely haven't spent the entire day / last week preparing and writing about. Don't know what you're talking about.
Man, it must be hard keeping tabs on all of those big, bold red fonts saying do not publish until this date.
Yeah, I mean, there's been, once bitten, twice shy, as they say. I now live. Do you know what the thing I ask my Google Assistant the most is?
The weather.
We'll do it now. Hopefully I won't pick it up. Hey, Google, what time is 10 a.m. Central European time in Australia?
No?
I ask that a lot. Hey,
You're hanging.
today at 10 a.m. European time, we probably spoke to the CEO and creative director of Cleef Arpels, the fantastic jewellery and timekeeping maison, a gentleman by the name of Nicolas Bos.
So this is the big boss.
Yeah, he is. He's interesting guy. Apparently, he's the only Richemont CEO who is also a creative director.
Huh. There you go.
Consolidating that power.
And I did see you were at a VC&A event recently.
Yes. Yeah, I thought it was nice, poetic timing. Hosted a small dinner the other week. It's pretty special.
So you're across the watches closely then?
Yeah. I didn't actually see too many watches on the night. They were sort of in people's hot little hands, and I just,
In two sentences, sum up Von Cleef watches for me.
incredible jeweled, fantastic creations with really interesting mechanical complications. Full stop. Hard to tell the time.
Hard to tell the time, full stop.
Well, they don't use hands. Like it's a ballerina's wing past the leg.
There you go. Well, I'm sure we will hear more about it and much more from Mr. Bos, the boss at VC&A. Speaking of not boring watches, it's time to talk about boring watches, Felix.
That was I think this is something that we've been discussing on and off. I think like probably since Watches and Wonders.
Real talk for a second.
Yeah, real talk for a second. But recently it's been gaining a bit of momentum, and we've been having conversations, people I've been catching up with and on Discord, and that is 2022 the most boring year in watch releases?
Yeah, it is. To just answer without any further discussion, yes. I think the hot take here is that it is a bit of a slow year. And we've got some theories. Obviously, you kind of mentioned Watches and Wonders a few months ago.
Yep.
I think the big thing is, this whole pre-COVID, it was going pretty crazy, and obviously no one knew the pandemic was coming. And if you did, well, you're probably an evil villain of some sort. But everything was going crazy, and then you sort of had COVID, interrupted a whole bunch of stuff, and everyone was trying really hard to put out, a whole bunch of interesting things, all things they didn't get to release after a year, the first year of the pandemic. And now it's just like, it feels like everything's sort of spaced out. We had the big watch fair, back to normal. There's Geneva Watch Days coming up, as you said. There's some other stuff on the horizon, but it does kind of feel like there's a bit of a lull. Like what is more important this year?
So my take on it is, when I sort of talk about that sort of COVID slowing things down, it's not necessarily, I think maybe our perceptions have changed.
Yeah.
That's one part of it. But the other thing is, I reckon there might be a very real, logistical sort of quantifiable side of it where, Hans and the design team have been off with COVID and have been on half time or, working out of the office. And just the productivity hasn't been there.
I mean, all over the world, right? So why would watches be immune to that? There's obviously labor shortages as well. Europe was hit really badly. War and that sort of stuff is not great.
I'm sure strategically they've also gone, hey guys, let's slow the brakes a little. Let's just pop a new dial in it and, make it in a gold case, and we don't need to bust a gut while we're all, uncertain of what's happening. 2 years ago, like when I'm sure these were sort of being made, they didn't know what was going to happen. So
everyone's just finally taking up their annual leave all at once. They're on holidays.
But I think that's part of it. I think there's that. The other side of it is, I suspect it's always been this way, and maybe we're just noticing it more.
Mm.
Maybe it's us, maybe it's where we're at, like, and this is one. Well, any listeners, please call in. Like, maybe it's because, we've been doing this for a while, and, the sort of people we talk to have been in the watch, air quotes, watch game for a bit. So maybe that's, it reflects our point in the journey. Oh, because this is just remind me, I caught up in when I was in Noosa with Seiko, there was a guy there who took some photos of the watches, whose name I can't remember right now. But
Sure.
he was quite new to it, and he was so excited about watches. And he's like, I want the Batman, I want this, I want the Jubilee bracelet, I want the Oyster bracelet. Like, I love this, I love that. What do I do? Like that sort of enthusiasm for the hobby is something that I haven't come across in a while.
Yeah, you're right. It could be a bit of fatigue, and also it could be that the perception of what we actually are interested is has shifted as well, right? Like, it's probably evident in other aspects of life where you kind of had the pandemic hit, and everyone was kind of like, oh yeah, I kind of want to have a bit more fun. I want to have a bit more personality. Life's a bit
Mm.
short. I want to do the thing, and I don't want to do the same thing as everyone else. I want to kind of do things that make me happy. So maybe a watch that we would have thought was like a great banger 2 years ago, 3 years ago, now doesn't cut the muster.
Yeah, and I think that is what you're sort of saying is part of the solution. It's because I think all of everything we've said is true. Like, there's no single reason, except for the evil plot of the Swiss conglomerates to, kill creativity. Um, what is the solution, Andy?
Stop buying boring watches. I think that's what we've agreed upon. Buy what you like, and that's always been the solution, right? Buy what you like. Don't buy the hype. Don't play the market. Buy what you like.
But I think, is it also sort of incumbent on people? And this is a sort of a very high horsey thing to say. People in a taste making position,
Mm,
people in, I'm thinking about Hodinkee, I'm thinking about the sites to not, because of course, like the boring watches are there for a reason. Like there's a reason a black dialed Rolex or an Omega Speedmaster or a, whatever it is has been around forever because they're great watches and they will serve a lot of people really, really well. But if you're interested in buying more than one watch, it's, you know, that's going to be the first watch. And then going to start investing in, weird pink anordains and, Alan Silverstein collaborations.
yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've seen a Rolex review this year, other than new GMT Master when it first came out. What happened to that? Why are we talking about stone dials and
Mm. Well,
precious metal yacht masters on rubber straps?
because we can't get them. So, but that's what I'm saying. Like maybe it's we need to stop reading the same article about 3 Rolexes you can actually buy at retail, and
Yep.
this is what the market's doing, and 7 alternatives to the Nautilus,
Mm.
and start championing different. I think actually, to be fair, like we're seeing some of that. Like we'll talk about Hodinkee in a second, but their coverage, they did a lot of 90s stuff, which is, I
Mm.
mean, it's still looking back though, like
Mm. It's an
I
interesting point. It's an
I
interesting
I
observation.
struggle to think of an original new watch design. The 2 that I think stand out in the last 30 years
Mm.
are the Omega SMP that Bond wore,
Yep.
and maybe the Octo Finissimo that have a chance of lasting beyond a trend.
Mm. Yeah,
I
you're
don't
right.
know.
Hey, speaking of creativity and ways to have fun,
Mm.
a great way to have fun: change the strap on your watch. If I had to name, just out of the air, pick a name out of the sky of a watch strap brand I love, it's Artem Straps. ArtemStraps.com, Felix. Father's Day's around the corner. You are a father, a dad, a
Yes.
daddy, and a zaddy.
To be honest, if you're listening to this and you haven't sorted out Father's Day, you
Mm.
probably left around a little bit late. But I
And you
think
know
in
what?
today's modern era and the time of, shipping delays, you can send your father a shipping notification or an
Mhm.
order notification and go, Happy Father's Day. I've
Boom.
bought you a loopless sailcloth.
And you know what? Daddy is a state of mind, Felix. So just going to throw that in the
Um,
mix. You don't have to be a daddy to have an Artem Strap.
yeah, I mean, yeah, everyone's got a father somewhere.
It's scientifically. What do you love about Artem Straps, Felix?
Well, I've talked about this a lot. I'm trying to find them. I put them somewhere on my desk. I got a package.
Yes, you did.
Did you get the same package?
I did. Can we talk about it?
I
We
don't
were
know.
told not to talk about it.
Oh, yeah, we should check. Stay tuned. Or maybe go to artemstraps.com to
Mm,
find out if there's any secret new releases. I reckon probably their Instagram's better for the early
mm.
news.
Keep your finger on the pulse there, yeah, Artem.straps on Instagram. There's,
Sure.
plenty of great combinations, and, if you think you're in a lull, with your watch collecting, think about your dad. If he's had that same, watch for 30 years, it's time he needs to spice it up. He needs something new, and there's no better
Or
place than Artem Straps.
if your dad's, always not looking after his watches, getting on the tools, beating
Yeah.
up his nice calfskin leather strap, get him something
Mm,
hard wearing.
exactly. Now, Felix, you mentioned, Hodinkee before.
I did.
Hodinkee's had a bit of we've not talked about this. Late news.
Mm.
A few people have left, quite a few people have joined. Big departure, though.
Yeah, Jack Forster is now the head of content and Watchbox.
Big, big departure.
Mm. We talk about it with a little bit with an upcoming guest
Mm.
about the sort of the changing nature of watch editorial.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, but they did get the addition of Tony from Rescapement, Tony Trainer, who we're big fans of. So that's cool to see, and I think half a dozen others nearly. So well, it seems to be a lot of things happening there. We'll have to get someone from the new crew on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can
So
I tell you something? This is very off topic about Tony Trainer.
he's no relation to Megan.
No, surprisingly close. So I always think when I read Tony Trainer's real name, I always think he would be an exceptional, like UK dub slash grime artist to have a feat on a track with, like Roots Maneuver,
Or like Stormzy, yeah.
like Roots Maneuver feat Charlie Tuna and Tony Trainer. I mean,
Yeah, because the way it's spelt right with
yeah,
the
with an
it's
A.
with an A.
Yeah. Anyway, so maybe Tony, after a dinky editorial. If anyone can get onto a Roots Maneuver track, it's got to be them.
John Mayer feat Tony Trainer.
Yes.
Bit of a genre bending.
Oh, talking watches with Roots Maneuver feat Tony Trainer.
Here we go. I love it. Have you been up to anything else other than?
Nah, just talking trash on the podcast and moving house.
No, I love it. I've been getting some short form watch content on TikTok,
Me too.
and other platforms, right? And it's interesting because the original short form was basically just like a wrist roll,
Mm.
maybe a double wrist roll, maybe an unboxing, and it's taken a little while for it to happen, but we're finally at short form, sub 1 minute watch content.
Yes.
I'll give a special shout out to there's this guy on TikTok who apparently walks up to people on the street, you know, just on an iPhone or whatever, and asks them what they're wearing and the
I get
story
this guy.
behind it. And it's a good human interest piece, I think. A little bit. I don't know. Some of these people kind of go, would you really stop and tell a stranger who's just pointed out, your 150,000 gold Patek on the street? Would you open up like that?
Have Have you looked into who this guy is? I think it's the same person.
Yeah, I think he's a watch dealer.
Yeah, I actually saw one where he sort of talked about his first. I was going to send it to you, but then I'm like, no, I don't want to get more watch content on TikTok.
Mm, mm,
He got his first deal. Like he was on a Facebook group and he saw a gold Nautilus 3700
mm.
for like someone was like posting like, "What's this worth?" And he ended up, you know, he bought it for like 80K. He flew across the country and got a dealer to fund it, and he got a commission. And he gave the jeweler a commission, and now it's worth a lot more money.
Yeah,
Which it was one of the first sort of TikTok watch stories I've watched all the way through. So yeah, I think we're getting there.
we're getting there. Yeah, I saw another guy who was like, he tracked down a watch and he wanted to show you how he wanted to make $1,000 in an afternoon buying and flipping a watch. So he went to, the New York Diamond District where, there's all there's sort of like, quote unquote wholesale stuff happening and, finds a date just and, buys it for 3 grand and then puts up on his Instagram stories. And then 4 hours later, he sold it for 3.5 or 4.5 or something.
Yeah.
And sort of had documented it in a TikTok-y way, which was, it was interesting. I don't know that.
I mean, it's directly feeding into what we were talking about before. Like, it's still that watches as a commodity,
Mm.
which is maybe we should be trying to get away from that.
Maybe. The other thing I did upon the recommendation / reminder from this upcoming guest, I think you mentioned as well, really paying in dividends, I guess, but
Mm.
the Cartiers by Francesca Cartier Brickle.
Yes,
Been out for ages. I've not gotten around to reading it, so I downloaded the audiobook.
the audiobook. How is it?
Haven't started it, so I'm just
Who
letting
reads
you
it?
know so that next week you can ask me and I'll
Okay,
have at least started it and I can tell you. Surely it's going to be good though. It's got
I want to know who reads it.
I can tell you if you talk for 30 seconds while I open up Audible.
Yeah, I would really like it to be read by someone with an aggressive Swiss French accent.
Okay.
Got the yeah.
I don't want to start playing it, then Amazon will sue us.
Anyway, we'll put it in the show notes.
The pressure's on. The pressure's on. How do I
Yeah,
view it?
we're cracking. We've got to move on, Andy. We've got
Gotta
to
move
move
on.
on.
All right. We'll link it up in the show notes. Okay. So what are we doing now, Felix?
Let's talk to Nicolas Bos, CEO and creative director of Cleef Arpels, about the poetry of time.
Okay.
Mr. Bos, it's a real honor and a privilege to speak to you. Especially, I'm very glad in a way that we're speaking to you after Watches and Wonders, because if I had spoken to you on the first day of the fair or during the fair, I might not have truly appreciated just how beautiful the creations you made and released at the show were. It was a really, really strong showing for you. And I just wanted to sort of speak to you about those objects and the timepieces and how you work, form, and function together. They, in the press releases, you call them extraordinary objects and they live up to the name, but they still, for all their beauty, they do have a purpose. Why is that?
I think maybe the wording "extraordinary object" is a bit, too much, but in a way it's true because they are really, they are not ordinary or common objects, even in our world, which is, by nature a world of rather unusual and precious and rare objects. I think that to start with the last part of the question, the fact that there is a functionality, in a way, has to do somehow with playing by the rules. This is, a watch fair. We are a jewelry and watch company, so or in theory, our purpose is to create objects that do have, a function. Whether they are pieces of jewelry and as necklaces, bracelets, rings, they serve, a function of adorning the body in a traditional manner, or they relate more to the watchmaking tradition, and as such, they should be telling the time. That's the least that you can expect in a way. So it's really a function that we integrated, although it's from far not the main point or the main characteristic of these objects, because of course what goes beyond timekeeping is probably more elaborate and more important to us. But it's also kind of nice for us and for me to see that they still belong to a tradition of clocks, in a way, table clocks, decorative clocks that do have that function of timekeeping, but then add to it on an ornamental dimension. Of course, these mechanical features that do have more in common with the world of automata than with the world of watchmaking. And also both worlds are related because they both use mechanical energy through traditional systems of wheels mainly. They did actually go in different directions along the centuries. And there are certain traditions, even mechanical traditions, attached to the world of automata, which is a very, very limited world, of course, that actually are slightly different from the ones that you find in watchmaking, although the basis and the skills, in a way, and the understanding and the engineering is a bit the same. And in these pieces, and also in quite a lot of our watches, we try to capture, some of both worlds and sometimes to bridge between both worlds, which is the case also for the Heure Floral, the watch that we introduced this year, which is very much at the crossroads between watches and automata.
I'm glad you sort of brought up automata because, from my point of view, that's one of the most remarkable things, the work that you do, and I believe you work with François Junot for some of this work. And there's other very visible aspects of skill in these extraordinary objects and watches. The stone setting, the fine enamel work. Are there more subtle aspects or less obvious parts of the designs and the construction of these both objects and watches that you think people should be more aware of?
I think that the great thing to me with this object that there's almost an infinity of dimensions and of things that you can discover albeit, during a 1 minute sequence. I think that most of this, at least the 3 automata that we introduced, they run pretty much on a, 50 to 60 second scenario, in a way, animation. And I think you can watch it, dozens or hundreds of times. There is always something new that you will discover, which I'm fortunate enough to have watched them a lot of times. And there's always something new, that your attention will focus upon. And that's only for the visible part. Then, there is the opportunity, and actually some of these, 2 of these pieces provide for that physical opportunity to open the bottom part, which you didn't necessarily see because when we showed them at the fair, we kept it closed. But there is actually a door, at least to the Fontaine aux Oiseaux, and then there is an opening also on the planetarium, where you can, when you figured out everything that's going on the surface, you can still enjoy yourself, looking at the mechanism, in action, and what goes on underneath. And here also there's a high, level of decoration. I think that to me, the primary driver, in a way, when we work on these pieces or these creations, is an image. And I think, we don't start with technique. We don't start with craftsmanship for the sake of craftsmanship, or the idea to go, beyond what others have done, or which is not in watchmaking. We really start with an image, with a story that we want to tell, and with a visual impact. And that visual impact, in a way, that enchantment, that, whatever you call it, that surprise that we've seen on some of the faces of our visitors, you can, you try to create through a combination of crafts, of techniques, of tradition. So there is, of course, tradition of mechanism. But once again, when you're looking for the impact, in a way, or the visual impact, it's not necessarily the most complex mechanism that will provide for the most impressive movement. Sometimes you can create something that's really magical, very surprising, with a mechanism that by, watchmaking standards or, engineering standards, is pretty simple, but very demonstrative. And sometimes you can have mechanisms that are extremely complex, but actually the visual impact is not so impressive. And this is, to me, one of my limitations when it comes to very high watchmaking, that sometimes, you understand, I've been part of this world for a few decades. I understand, what the watchmaker is, talking to me about, and what, the very, very new type of accuracy and measurement, is provided in his movement. But sometimes I find just the expression of it, the way it translates visibly, a bit disappointing. Because yes, it's the most complex equation du temps and something that has never been done before, but if you don't know it, you can't necessarily tell, which is not so much, an issue for most watchmakers, because basically, they're really researching in terms of, technique and accuracy and timekeeping. So we have a slightly different stance on that, even though we use the same tradition. And then, of course, what we try to bring from our own tradition of jewelry and decorative arts is the decorative component. I think that, to me, these pieces are not pieces of engineering; they are pieces of decorative art. And as such, we're trying to make them beautiful. We're trying to make them quite, impressive. We're trying to use techniques. You were mentioning enameling, of course. All the techniques of jewelry, of gold sculpting. All types of setting, all types of lapidary techniques, stone cutting, stone carving. But also some techniques that we wouldn't necessarily use on the jewelry, because here we're working on a slightly different scale, so it enables to open up the spectrum of technique. For instance, techniques of lacquer. There's on the Fontaine aux Oiseaux, one of my favorite techniques is the lacquer with the integration of eggshell inlay. It's not something that we use, on a limited surface of a piece of jewelry, but on that type of scale, it's a beautiful technique that was very much in fashion in the 1920s, that we are very, very happy to bring back. So I think that, yes, we concentrate on mechanical movement for the storytelling, and we concentrate on decorative elements in the way they can be associated with the movement to really create that story that's lasting for 1 minute.
Thank you for that explanation. And one thing you mentioned a little while ago that it strikes me that you must have a unique perspective on you've seen these automata operate maybe more than anyone else except the people responsible for making them. I suspect you're also present when a lot of people see them work and move for the first time. Is there any sort of particular way that seeing these beautiful objects, in motion strikes people, or is it a single emotion, or is it different for different people?
I wouldn't know. I think it's quite personal. We've seen very, very positive reaction, among the teams when we're of course working on the pieces, but definitely when we are showing them for the first time during the fair. I think, that there's, I'm unable to qualify, a personal emotion, but there is really this feeling, and we use that word a lot, but I think it's quite accurate. There is really this feeling of enchantment. I think that there is kind of magic. It's a bit like, the very, very good Walt Disney movie or Pixar movie. I think, it goes, across age groups or, cultural background. There is something a bit, universal. And at the same time, that seems to bring you back to some kind of childhood, emotions. And to me, what was quite striking is that among the viewers or the visitors, some of them, are completely newcomers to that world of the automata. It's probably, even maybe the first time or one of the first times they see, a few in real, or at least not, a historical one. And some of them actually don't know very well, watchmaking. That's not their world. And some of them are, among the best experts in the world, and they are able, to understand and describe, what comes into any animation, any movement, any technique. But regardless of their background and their approach, they were all, at least the one that I talked to that were polite, they all loved it. And so I think there is something quite universal. And the thing that struck me the most, in a way, is that, showing these pieces to young people or to kids, mine, for instance, which at the end of the day, they don't care. They couldn't care less about, mechanical watches and our world of watchmaking. That's not their world. They're like 10 or 12 or and they've seen pretty much everything. I mean, they've seen, the 3D version of Lord of the Rings. They play, in virtual reality.
They've got iPhones.
Yeah, so, there's not much to impress them with, when it comes to special effects. And yet they are mesmerized by these objects. So I think there is kind of even some subconscious or unconscious, feeling that you're looking at something that's mechanical, that you can relate to, that's made by people, with their hands. That, if you open the box, you will understand, how this flower opened, because it's very simple. It's kind of, it's a spring that goes into the wheel, that goes into a system. It's not, a piece of, it's not a chip or a piece of electronics. And even if they don't see that inside, it feels that there is, an emotion attached to that. That goes beyond, what it would be if it was, an electronic piece. Because of course there are a lot of, robotics in this world that can maybe, that can, of course, provide for much more complex, animation. So, and that seems to be quite universal. So, and to me, that was fascinating to watch.
Yeah, that must be quite special. Now, these incredibly beautiful, complex things, I can imagine, must have incredible challenges sometimes. What is involved? What are some of the difficulties you've sort of come across trying to create these objects or these timepieces, and how do you, sort of work around them or solve them?
There are many, many difficulties at a lot of different levels. The first automaton that we created, that was Féondine, it was a fairy sitting on a lotus leaf that we introduced 5 years ago. I think from the day I started the process till the day it went out, there was a 10-year period. So 10 years for development. And it's not just, matter of speech. It's really 10 years. So there was stop and go, and there were times where we felt it was absolutely impossible. There are many, many difficulties, and of course, when we are working on these pieces, we are not trying to get rid of the difficulties. We're trying to, of course, include them, go beyond them so that the piece will be as extraordinary as possible. So they can be of very, very different nature. We have to give you, two examples. That was the case on the Fée Ondine, for example, the first one. We were working with enamel. We work a lot with enamel, and we have a very large enamel workshop in Switzerland that's dedicated to watch dials. So it's pretty much a technique that we master in a way, but we master it on certain scale. And here, we were taking it to a different scale. Let's say 10 inch, 8 to 10 inch, size. And then enamel doesn't react at all the same. So it took us a couple of years to find ways to change the technique, revisit the design, revisit the construction, because enamel was just breaking on such a surface. So and we have many of these, type of issues that have to do with the scale. Of course, it's a very different scale from the scale of watches or jewelry. Then there are some issues with some mechanisms, and the way to integrate, complexity of movement in a seamless way. So, for instance, if you think of the fontaine aux oiseaux in the birds, one of the great difficulties that we wanted the bird to move on the edge of the fountain. Usually, when you're looking at an automaton, it is the historical one. You're looking at a little character, for instance, a poet or a writer or a card player. Of course, they don't move because the whole mechanism goes through the body in order to animate the hands and the head. But here we wanted the bird to be able to move, so it meant that we had to make sure that all the systems that will animate the wings and the tail and the eyes and the head, they go through one single little tube, through a system of wires and cables, and that tube can actually move, from the main source of energy and the system. So which is super complicated because, of course, if it's one single environment which is fixed, it's much easier. But you want all that to be moving in all different directions at the same time, and you want to keep flexibility. So that's typically one aspect that was challenging. On a different one, on the planetarium, for instance, which is probably a bit closer to the tradition of watchmaking because it's really a real planetarium with a perpetual calendar. A lot of the elements we really developed in a way as in a clock, as in a very, very big watch. So to make it, for some elements, in a way, it was a bit about bringing the same mechanism that you would have in a high complication watch, but to a larger scale, and of course provide for the animation. But something that we didn't necessarily estimate, in the right way until the very, very end of the process, is that, of course, it's creating a lot of noise, and the noise that you wouldn't hear in a watch because it's very, very tiny. When you expand to different size, that's creating a noise. And since there is a music box with two systems, a music box and a system of bells, you don't want the interference with the noise because, of course, it's creating a lot of issues with the sound of the music. So that's typically something that we had to revisit. And I must say that when you work on all these pieces separately, you don't really hear it or figure out until, it's finally, all put together. And then, you start to hear, and it's not necessarily something to thought about. So there are a lot of things that you discover in the process where at the end of the day, there is no previous experience, or if there is, probably some of it was lost, 100 or 200 years ago. So you've sometimes got to somehow even reinvent a category of objects and rebuild your own culture, which once again goes, on top of the culture of watchmaking and jewelry and decorative arts. So it's many challenges on a daily basis, and that's why these projects take such a long time. And as François Junot, says, very rightly, you can have everything right, everything figured out, everything working perfectly until you've assembled the whole piece all together. And you press the button, you don't know if it's going to work. So
that must be a moment of sort of fear and excitement in equal parts. I'm glad you sort of talked about the planetarium because for my last question, I'd like to ask a little bit about your sort of timekeeping and your approach to timekeeping. The planetarium is, as you said, it's very, very traditional, perpetual calendar. Unlike the floral watch, which I think was one of the most critically well sort of received watches of Watches and Wonders. And that seems to me really what I think about when I think about Von Cleef & Arpels' time is that poetry. It's that time in a sense of more than hours and minutes. How do you shape time, and what does it mean at Van Cleef & Arpels?
But I think once again, something that we touched upon, time and watchmaking in that way is not about measuring performance and going for technical prowess and accuracy. It's more an opportunity to tell a story and to try to approach a kind of poetic and narrative vision that we've developed along more than a century in jewelry, but to give it the life of a mechanical movement. So that story can be coming from the representation of nature, can be coming from a theater play, from literature or poetry, from a very simple representation of two lovers on the bridge in Paris. Once again, it always starts with a story, with an image, and what in jewelry by nature will always be somehow a still life. The possibilities of mechanical watchmaking give us the opportunity to bring it to life and in a way to go from a photograph to a movie in a way. So that's the way we look at watchmaking. It's that opportunity to give life to our stories, and we try to look at a time that's more cyclical. That's more based on the rhythm of nature. That's more based on the idea of spring and renewal, rather than a linear approach. So something that you will find in a presentation of nature, and in a way that's the common element between, if I think of it, between the Earth Floral, which is very much about that idea of flowers that open and close, on a daily rhythm, and then on a seasonal rhythm. And of course, the planetarium, the movement of the planets, as it has been, described, and reinterpreted through the history of watchmaking for centuries, is just, a larger version of that cycle. And so the starting point, once again, is very visual always. If you think of the Earth Floral, it was that story that we mentioned of that, that idea of Carl von Linné in the 18th century that, had this vision of that garden that was, becoming a clock because flowers would open and close at different hours of the day. So once again, it's very visual representation. So you try to give life to that using, our crafts. And the planetarium, the starting point was really these objects that I find extraordinary from the 17th, 18th century that were scientific objects. They were a representation of the solar system, what was known at the time. But to me, they are beautiful, sculptures. And actually, there was at the time a very, very strong decorative component. If you look at the way, the planets were sculpted, the decor on the brass on these pieces, they are fantastic objects. And when we worked on our first, planetarium watch, it was really the idea to pay tribute to that history of astronomical watches, but really giving it back its decorative elements, so that the planets would not be just a flat indication on a dial somewhere in a small area of a dial, but that would be really the whole expression of the watch. And the planets would not be, only an evocation, but they would be a three-dimensional representation, sculpted in stones. And so what we tried when we created the watch was to capture in the size of the watch the emotion or the feeling that we had with these historical, table planetariums. And then working on the watch, we thought that one day we would love to go back to the wider scale of the table planetarium, not only to make it bigger, which is by itself quite nice because you can go further in terms of jewelry component and decorative element, but also to add an element of whimsicality in an object that by nature is very, very scientific and reasonable, because it shows the passing of and it has to be extremely accurate, hence the perpetual calendar. But we wanted to include, through that idea of the dance of the planet and the musical score, an idea that yes, there are cycles, and objects like this one, are here to measure very accurately these cycles. But then you can play with them as well, and you can start, something that's a bit more, poetic with a touch of fantasy in a way. And that's the way we used, in a way, the larger size of that planetarium to bring this, let's say, rather unexpected animation alongside the expected accuracy.
Yeah, thank you so much for that explanation. And thank you so much for A, speaking with me today, and B, for making such special timepieces and special objects. I'm really glad that, in an industry that can be very constrained, these objects exist and that Van Cleef and Arpels continue to make them.
Thank you for your comment. It means a lot. So thank you very much, Felix.
Andy, fascinating discussion with Nicolas Bos from Van Cleef and Arpels. Apologies you couldn't make it.
Shame.
Yeah, check them out. I will link up some videos to the Fay Ondine, my favourite extraordinary object. Andy, we should thank some people. One person in particular.
Yeah. Artem from Artem Straps.
Mr. Artem.
Mr. Artem. and his father for having, Mr. Artem as well. Mr. Artem Senior. Artemstraps.com. Join our Discord while you're supporting us and our sponsors. Felix will drop a link to the show notes for that. If you want to get in touch with us, otthepodcast@gmail.com or our Instagram, Felix.
Podcast.
ot.pod. That is our Instagram. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Be friends. Make TikToks and tag us.
Tell your familiar.
Yeah. We will see you next week.